If you have stiff knees and you'd like to learn exercises to improve your knee pain and stiffness, then this video is for you. I'm Dr. Dave Candy, and in this video, I'm going to show you 5 exercises to help improve knee pain and stiffness. Now, before we get started, we should probably define what stiffness means, because there are really 2 different types of stiffness that you can have in regards to your knee. You can have an actual joint stiffness where you lack some range of motion in either bending or flexion or extension or straightening. Or you can have sort of a subjective stiffness where you don't really have a range of motion loss, but the joint just feels tight and stiff. And most of these exercises are going to address the types of stiffness that are actual joint range of motion loss. But I will include an exercise to help if you don't have any motion loss, but your knees still feel kind of stiff. So exercise number 1 is going to be to address a loss of extension or straightening of the knee. A lot of people will either try stretching their hamstrings or stretching their calves, but if you have an actual stiff knee joint, that's not going to matter that much. Additionally, when you're walking, you don't usually get to the end range of your hamstring motion. So stretching your hamstrings isn't necessarily a great way to improve your knee extension if you do have a knee extension loss. Now, to tell if you actually have a joint stiffness, you want to lay down on your back and try and flatten your leg as best you can. And if you can't get the back of your knee all the way down to the table, then chances are you have a little bit of a stiff joint. Now, you may notice that mine doesn't go all the way down, and that's been that way in both knees ever since I was a child. I remember in sports when I was little, coaches would say, push your knees down straight, and that's just as straight as they go. So it's more important that you have symmetry between the 2 sides, that they straighten an equal amount. So find what's normal for you. But in general, you want to be able to touch the back of your knee down to the table. Now, if you do have some motion loss, here's a way to help improve your knee joint extension. You're going to take a towel and put it behind your lower leg bone or your tibia, and that helps push the tibia forwards. As you extend your knee, your tibia needs to glide in a forwards direction, and your thigh bone or femur needs to glide in a backwards direction. So you're going to stabilize the knee just below the knee joint. So it's actually at the top of the calf where you place this towel. Then you're going to take your hand, place it on your thigh like this, and put a downward pressure here. Now, notice it's not an arcing motion like this. It's a translation. So you want the towel to be pressing upwards on your tibia, and your hands are pressing downwards on your femur. And then just hold that position. You can oscillate back and forth like this. This is a situation where oscillating when stretching isn't necessarily a bad thing, because you're not stretching the muscles, you're moving the joint. And so you can oscillate like that, or just do sort of a sustained stretch there with downward pressure going this way. Now, this shouldn't be painful, so if you feel like you're having too much pain in your knee, just use a thicker towel roll so you're in a little bit relative more bending or flexion as you're doing that exercise. So that's exercise number 1 to help with the extension or straightening of your knee. Now, if you have stiffness in bending of your knee, this is the next exercise. Now, you should normally have about 135 degrees of bending. Now, if you can only bend your knee, say 90 degrees or so, that's probably a little bit too limited. So if you can only bend this much, and it's a joint-related stiffness, it's not related to muscles in your knee, a way that you can help get this knee to bend better is by kind of going inwards like this, grabbing and twisting your tibia inwards, and then pulling it backwards. This inward twisting, along with posterior glide or backwards glide that way, helps improve knee joint bending. And kind of pulling like that, again, 30 seconds to a minute, and then bring it up a little bit farther. Twist, pull, Go for about 30 seconds to a minute. And then you come up a little bit farther. And you repeat that 3 to 5 times or until you kind of hit an end point where it just won't go any farther. And so that's the second exercise. Now, before we jump into the last 2 exercises, I do want to go through the exercise if you just have sort of that subjective knee stiffness where it's not really tight, you're not really lacking range of motion, but when you're sitting for a long period of time, you feel like your knees just get tight and stiff. There's really no other way to put it. If that's the case, you probably just need to move your knees. And so just going back and forth like that, if you're in an airplane or sitting at a desk for a long period of time, just moving your legs back and forth. You can alternate or do one at a time. It really doesn't matter that much, but that just gets your muscles loosened up, gets some synovial fluid or lubricating fluid in your joints, and helps make your joints feel less stiff, even though you really don't have a true stiffness of the joint. So now going into exercise number 4, and these get into more functional weight-bearing stiffness. So if you have stiffness in your leg when you're going to take a step, stiffness extending your leg, your calves actually do impact your function. And so this may not be so much of a joint stiffness, but rather a calf muscle stiffness. And so to address stiff calf muscles, if you kind of get into the position like you're going to take a step, and then drive this heel back down towards the floor. So it's like you've gone into toe off, now go back to where your heel's on the floor and just press the knee all the way back straight. Then come up, press the knee all the way back straight. Come up on your toes, press the knee all the way back straight. And you're trying to get your heel down to the floor while also straightening your knee out. And that helps you in that terminal stance just before you go to push off to take the next step. So that's the 4th exercise. Now, the 5th exercise addresses the bending of your knee when you're going to walk. When you go to bend your knee as you're walking, you need to have just enough clearance to bring it through. And you don't need so much that it's usually a joint limitation, but your quadricep muscles, particularly a long one that crosses your hip called the rectus femoris, can get into an end range position where it starts compressing your kneecap up against your thigh bone, and that can cause a feeling of stiffness when you're going to take your next step when you're walking. So a way to test for that, to test the stiffness of the rectus femoris, is to lay on your back and bring your knee up toward your chest. Then you let this leg fall down off the side of a bed like this. Now, in the ideal situation, your thigh should fall all the way flat up against the bed, and your knee should bend to 80 degrees. So just a little bit short of being at a 90-degree angle. And I will tell you, I'm struggling to get this far, and I'm sure it's still tight. But if you have some stiffness in your thigh muscles or your quadricep muscles, then just doing this as an exercise is actually one good way to stretch it. But there's an easier, more functional way where you don't have to lay down. And that's in a standing position where you go like you're going to take a step. Now just bend this knee up. And it's not just a knee bending or a leg curl type of exercise that you might do at the gym. You want to actually keep your hip in extension, squeeze your glutes, and then try to pick your toes up off the floor and bend your knee up as much as you can. And so this is an active knee flexion while also activating your glute muscles, and you're using your hamstrings to bend your knee. So you want to try to bend your knee up as much as you can, keeping your hip in extension, and then come back down to the floor. And bend the knee up and come back down to the floor. And bend the knee up and then come back down to the floor. So hopefully those exercises helped you out if you do have a stiff knee. Give them a try and leave a comment. I'd love to hear your feedback on how they work for you. And if you do have any questions, leave them in the comments and I will try to answer them as best as I can. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.